Hi, everybody. Welcome to Girls Night In. I am Coly Haan. So you guys signed up to learn a little bit about natural wine. It's something that is getting a lot of traction right now, a lot of buzz, but it's actually a very old way. It's the original way of making wine. So just to kind of jump in, what is natural wine? So we all have an idea of what organic is these days because, the way we eat and there's organic stuff everywhere now. So that pertains to the actual farming process. So organic, biodynamic, that's what's happening in the vineyard. Natural is what's happening in the actual winery itself. So during the process of making wine. So what a lot of people don't know is that there's over 70 additives that can legally be put into wine without telling you on the label. So different chemicals, dyes, additives. This is also what sometimes makes people have allergies to wine or maybe a worse hangover. So the fundamental through line of natural wine is just fermented grapes. So there's no additives. Now, it sounds simple, but there's obviously a lot to it. You also want to use native yeast. So that is one of the benchmarks of natural wine. So a lot of winemakers these days, they have different strains of yeast that they can use, commercial yeast that aren't native to the actual winery. So native yeast is what's happening just in the air, in the winery, in the vineyard, and that's what starts the fermentation. So you imagine back in the day when, the first, monk was creating wine, it probably happened on accident. It just started fermenting with whatever yeast was in the area. So how wine works is the yeast eats sugar and then poops alcohol and then dies. So yeast is a very important part of the fermentation process. So natural wine has native yeast. Another thing a lot of people don't realize is that wine cannot be vegan. I'm not vegan, but I like my wine to be. So there's a lot of different things that they can use to filter and fine the wine. So filtering meaning like getting out all the dead yeasts or particles. The fining is the same. It's like taking out that fine particles. So they can use several things like eggshells, fish gelatin, bull's blood, to filter your wine. So natural wine is vegan. So there's tends to be kind of unfiltered and unfined. So the wines are a little bit murkier, like cloudier. So that sometimes puts people off a little bit or scares them because it's not like crystal see-through like a more conventional wine would be, but rest assured it's still delicious. So that's another benchmark for natural wine. Also, we do like to start with organic farming. So no pesticides, the kind of beautiful philosophy that natural wine is about is kind of giving back to the earth instead of taking it away. So a lot of wineries will spray chemicals on the vines to keep out bugs or other mold or things like that. And, that's making its way into your system at some point. So we really like to start with organic or biodynamic farming. Biodynamic farming, if you're not familiar with it, is really kind of trippy. It takes into account everything. So the moon cycles and the stars, and they'll use all these kind of homeopathic like tinctures and ways to keep the vineyard healthy instead of spraying chemicals. So we love biodynamic farming. So basically you're looking at just really clean wine. Another thing that is kind of a hot button for a lot of people is sulfur. So sulfur is generally added to a wine to preserve it. It's a preservative. Now, sulfur naturally occurs during the winemaking process. Sulfur is everywhere. It's in our bodies naturally. But when you add sulfur, especially during fermentation, and it integrates into the wine, this is something that can really affect your body. Again, like I said, some people have, allergies with wine, or, they'll get red, or they have a headache the next day. That can be attributed to the added sulfur. So natural wine is minimal to no added sulfur. And if they do add sulfur, it's usually only at bottling. And what they'll do is they'll just rinse the bottle to kind of kill anything that might be in the bottle, and then they bottle it. So it's never integrated into the wine. So that's kind of the basics of natural wine. A phrase that we like to say and kind of keep in mind is minimal intervention. So that doesn't mean that they're just putting grapes and wishing for the best to happen in a big vat. There is a lot of skill and monitoring that goes into natural wine, sometimes more than conventional wines, because you're not using these tricks. It's kind of like, Mother Nature doesn't give us the same weather every year. So how are we going to have the same wine every year? We're going to manipulate it. Wine is a business. It's a big business. So, these really big wineries, and natural has nothing to do with price. So, not to call any of them out specifically, but, maybe say up in Napa, or these wines that, to be these great wines, they could be putting tons of additives and fillers in them because they need that wine to taste the same every year. It's money. So it's kind of like McDonald's, you think maybe back in the day when McDonald's first started, those burgers were, really 100% beef and really delicious and great. And over time, as it was a business, they started to cut more corners to make more money. And that's how the wine industry has become, unfortunately, as well, in a lot of ways. So natural winemaking is the original way of making wine before there were all these fillers and things that we could put into them. So it's kind of exciting. So some kind of terminology to like spin around as well is, when you're tasting a wine, you want to think of the structure of it. So there's acid. So acidity is acid. Kind of always sounds like a bad word, but in wine, it's a good one. It's that sensation you get when your mouth is watering, that juiciness. So that usually happens in the back of your cheeks. I wish we were all tasting the same wine right now so we could do it together. So that's one of the backbones of wine. Natural wine, they like to pick the grapes a little earlier to preserve that acidity. So the longer a grape stays on the vine, the more ripe it becomes, the more sugar it has. So, and the less acid. So as it stays on the vine, it increases in sugar and decreases in acid. Natural wine, they really are looking for that fresh, juicy acid. The more sugar you have in the grape, also the more alcohol you'll get, because the fermentation translates sugar to alcohol. So natural wines tend to be a little lighter in alcohol as well, which can also help with the hangover. Just a little fresher, not these like big monster, big zins and, with all this huge 16% alcohol. Natural wines tend to be around the 12% range. So acid is one of the backbones and structures of a really great wine. It also helps with food pairing. So if you're having something with like fat, for instance, anything that's kind of on the fattier side, you're going to want that acidity to help clean your palate after each bite. So we love acid. Another term that you might have heard is tannin. So tannin actually comes from the skin of the grape. So all grapes, the inside of the juice is clear. So that's how they can make white wine from red grapes. Like champagne, for instance, most champagnes have Pinot Noir in it, but the champagne is white. So they just take the skins off. So tannin is that thing that dries your mouth, that you'll feel in your gums and like underneath your lip, that really drying sensation. You're never going to get that with white wine because they generally do not have skins unless it's a skin contact, which is called an orange wine, which maybe you've heard about. It's also kind of a buzzword right now, orange wine. So that's basically white wine that has been sitting on its skins, fermenting on its skins, like a red wine would. So if rosé is red grapes made like white wine, with just a little bit of skin contact, a couple of hours. Then orange wine is white grapes made like red wine. So it'll sit on its skins for days and sometimes even weeks, depending on what the winemaker is going for. So orange wine is a really fun category. If you haven't tried it yet, I suggest seeking it out. It's kind of like if you don't like white wine and you like red wine, I liken it to appease red wine drinkers, because it does have a little bit of that tannin, that drying sensation that most red wine drinkers love. So that's one of the two main backbones of wine. You have acid and tannin, and they should work together. There's also minerals. So people talk about this word, it's called terroir. It's a French word, and it doesn't really translate to English. But what it means is the entire space of where the wine is being grown. So the terroir is not just the soil, but it's the slope, the weather, the wind, the sunshine, everything is the terroir. So the French are really proud of their terroir, especially in places like, Burgundy or Côte d'Aron, Champagne again. So those are really important words for them. But the minerality comes from the soil. So vines actually like to be treated kind of badly. So that's why they're planted really close together, because you want them to compete. So the more they're competing for resources, water especially, the farther down in the soil those roots have to dig. And the farther they go down, the more complexity of the minerality that's going to come into the wine. So that mineral sensation is that little saltiness that you might sometimes get on the tip of your tongue. So you have the juicy acid, the drying tannin, and then that little kind of prickly saltiness of the minerality. So then you're really getting into like, what is the wine? And then fruit, of course, is coming from the sugars. Some people, if you describe a wine as like really, a lot of strawberries. And, I've had people ask, does that mean there's strawberries in the wine? No, it's just something that the wine is throwing off. Certain varietals have different profiles. So like, for instance, Sangiovese, you'll almost always get a lot of violets, purple flowers. So that's kind of fun to think that, there's over 10,000 grapes in the world, and they all have these great little personalities. Certain notes come just from wood, like butter is not something that naturally is happening in wine. Vanilla, toast. So wood barrels are kind of their own thing. There's different toasts that you can get on the inside, and then there's like new oak, used oak, and neutral oak. So the more the barrel gets used, the less flavor it's imparting. Natural wine tends to just use neutral oak, if any oak at all, because again, they're just trying to let everything speak for itself without adding something to it. Oak is kind of something like you can consider as like a seasoning, like salt and pepper. So that's what oak will do to your wines. They will season them. There's also a couple of questions. So when they add sulfur, does that mean it has sulfates? Yes. So technically there's not a sulfur-free wine, because like I said, that there is sulfur that happens during the winemaking process, but you don't want added sulfur. So that's when it really affects you. So a little bit of sulfur during the natural process of making wine is what helps it preserve and last a long time for years to come. Although most wine generally is meant to be consumed as it's released. The ageability of wine comes with the acid and the tannin, so it has to have that structure, but most wine on the market is meant to be drank now. I remember I went over to my mom's a year or so ago, and I looked in her pantry and I was like, oh my God, Mom, you've had this wine. I gave it to you like 10 years ago. She's like, yeah, I'm aging it. I'm like, no, it's bad now. So not all wine will make it forever. So you might think that you're doing yourself a favor by saving something, but most of the time you're just going to want to drink it. So that's what I always recommend to people, is just drink it. And then of course there are certain bottles that will get better over time, but most of the time the winemaker won't release them until they're ready. That could be an idea, give an idea of wine purchase so we can experience what you're talking about. So yeah, I don't know where most of you guys are based. Natural wine is definitely having a moment. So there are more and more places getting into natural wine and selling them. Also online, there's a lot of online stores like Primal Wine. It's like a shipping service that you could check out. Also Vinovore, which is our shop, we ship as well. And I believe you guys got a discount code if you feel like shopping here. So we're all natural wine. The thing about natural wine too is it probably won't make its way into grocery stores, at least not any time soon, because the production is so small. Again, conventional wines, you know, it's a business. They're pumping these things out. They're making tons and tons of wine, where, you know, we get wine in that maybe only 20 cases were made, like just one barrel. So really limited, really loved and made with care. But it's out there to find. You can Google it if you're in kind of any kind of a city, as far as like, you know, Austin, Seattle, New York, Chicago. You know, you're going to have an easier time than maybe a more rural area. But again, you can also get it delivered. But I highly suggest it, especially if you have any issues with wine. Most people that I know that have had issues, once I turn them on to natural wine, they're like amazed. And myself included, I didn't ever have any issues with wine, but a couple of years ago, I got a free wine trip to go to Aspen, no, Vail, the Taste of Vail, Colorado. And of course, I wanted to take the trip, but you know, all the wines that were there were like, you know, really expensive wines, but none of them were natural. And I spent this whole weekend feeling terrible. I was drinking these wines and I was like, oh, I have a headache. I feel fuzzy. I feel foggy. And I never used to have a problem with conventional wines, but as I switched over to natural wine, I mean, I really, really feel the difference. Let's see. For 15, great. So if you have any more questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Another thing to think about when you're purchasing wine too is I always tell people that you don't have to spend a lot of money to have really great wine. I feel like a lot of the times it is gimmicky, you know, that this price comes into play. Also, you know, I'm here in California and I'm not dissing on my state. I love it very much, but there's not always a lot of great value in California. I think my own take on it is because the real estate's more expensive. You know, a lot of European wines like France, Italy, Spain, those vineyards most likely have been in those family for generations. So there's just a lot more value there, I feel like, personally. We also focus on female winemakers here at Vinovore. And, you know, we've noticed a big shift in the last few years, especially in Europe, where they're, you know, always before it would be the sons or the husbands of the daughters taking over the vineyard. And now it's becoming much more acceptable for the women to take over, which is kind of fun. Pet Nats are Pet Nats natural wine. Yes. So Pet Nat is short for petulant natural, or another word for it would be method ancestral. It's a form of making sparkling wine. We actually make our own pet nats here at the shop. We have, well, not here in the shop, but Vinovore has our own line of pet nats. So basically what happens is there's a second fermentation in the bottle, and that's what creates the bubbles, the CO2. And it just kind of stays that way until it's done fermenting, and you don't disgorge it, which means take out all the dead yeasts and stuff. So champagne, for example, they do a disgorgement. So imagine this like little French man on a bicycle in a cave. Every day he'll go down the aisle of bottles and he'll rotate it just a little bit and tilt it down. So the sediment is slowly making its way to the neck. And actually, Madame Clicquot, Veuve Clicquot, she was a really, Widow Clicquot, she's a real pioneer in the wine industry. And she was one of the ones that figured out how to disgorge, get all that stuff out. She literally, once the sediment was in the neck, stuck the bottle in the snow, and as it froze, she was able to pull it out and then put the cork in. So think of Pet Nat as similar, but without that last process of pulling it out, and putting the cork in. So most pet nats have a crown cap, which is how champagne's actually aged, in crown caps, like a soda bottle cap. So that's kind of interesting. They tend to be, they can run the gamut of like really, really funky. So, you know, some people get a little scared of natural wine because they can be a little funkier. And by funky, I mean, it's got like notes like barnyard, or, you know, more earthy, dusty. Sometimes they can call it mousy, which can be a negative term that refers to volatile acid happening, which is a flaw in the wine. But yes, pet nats, they're really foamy, really like super sparkly. If you get your hands on one, or, you know, just a tip in general, you want to store them upright in the fridge instead of on their side. So that way that sediment is staying at the bottom. And then when you open it, you want to make sure they're chilled really, really well. And you open it quickly. Otherwise, they can be kind of explosive. So that's a little pet nat tip. Let me see. Do you make blends or manipulate the wine in any way, or just take what you get? Do you make blends? Blending is something that all winemakers use, whether they're natural or not, and it's, you know, definitely a preference of what you're going for. So that means that they can take several grapes after they've fermented and now are wine, and then blend them together to create whatever flavor profile you're looking for. Co-fermenting, which is interesting method and actually kind of trending right now, is when you actually put the grapes, two different kinds of grapes together, or 3 or 4, and you ferment them all together. So that's a co-ferment. So it's the difference between blending and co-fermenting. You know, for me, myself, with our wines, I love single varietals, which means just the one grape, because you really get to taste the expression of what that grape is, like 100%. And we have some pretty unusual varietals of wine that we make. One is Langonese, which is indigenous varietal of Emilia-Romagna in Italy. And another one is Famoso, which is also indigenous to Italy. So those are kind of geeky and fun and unusual. It's not your normal Merlot or Cab, which are also, you know, the kings and queens of grapes and wonderful. You know, Chardonnay gets a bad rap because it's so easily manipulated. It's a very, very easy grape to grow. And it takes to a lot of added, you know, techniques very easily. Like wood, for instance. So when you have those buttery Chardonnays, whether you love them or hate them, that butter is coming from oak, and it's new oak. And there's also different kinds of oak. I know we touched on it a little bit. There's American, there's French, there's Slovenian oak. So American oak tends to give you that really vanilla, spice, butter, toast thing that you're going for with that. Do we ship to New Jersey? I believe we do. Yes, every state has different laws, but I do believe we ship to Jersey. Our family called it dirty socks. That's hilarious. Yeah, different terminology. One of the things that's kind of cool about wine too is, you know, you think of wine, or at least I did when I was first getting into it, as being kind of pretentious, you know, and you think of this snooty sommelier sniffing his glass and, you know, I'm getting such and such. You know, there actually are no wrong answers when you're tasting a wine, which I found kind of interesting, because when I first was getting into it, I was like, oh, you know, there's got to be a set thing of terminology that you need to use in describing a wine. And there are things that will come up over and over again. You know, obviously, you know, fruity, berries, you know, herbs, things like that, flowers. But you can say anything. I mean, it's actually anything goes, whether you're getting dirty socks or bubble gum. It's all up to you. So that's kind of the fun thing about wine, that is less pretentious than it seems. When I was getting into the wine industry, I was very intimidated. And when I started to learn about wine, when I became a sommelier, I realized that a lot of my preconceptions were totally wrong. I mean, people making wine, it's not a very glamorous job. These are farmers, really. You know, these are farmers. It's hard work, and they have to love what they do. So there's a lot of passion that goes into each bottle. And I really feel strongly about the natural wine movement because it's also giving back to the earth, you know, and because of, you know, climate change is a very real thing for the wine industry. And, you know, places that, you know, used to be cool climates are getting warm. I mean, I talked a little bit about co-fermenting, and I was talking to a winemaker the other day who would always co-ferment this wine, and he'd pick grapes that he had in Oregon and then grapes up in Washington. And in order to co-ferment, you need to pick at the same time. But because things are getting warmer, they're not ripening at the same time anymore. Washington's getting too warm too soon, and same with Oregon. So, you know, he can't do this co-ferment anymore because of global warming. So a lot of winemakers are trying to take that into account. I think, you know, also planting indigenous varietals is really something important. You know, Cabernet and Chardonnay are very popular here in California, but they're actually not very good drought resistant varietals. So there are other wines like, say, Nero de Avola, which is indigenous to Sicily, but does really, really well in high heat. Another important part of natural winemaking is dry farming, which means that literally you're just not adding water. So there's no irrigation. The only water that those vines are getting are from the weather. So also better for our planet, you know, we're not depleting our water system. So yeah, those are things that are kind of relevant and important to our planet and the winemaking business. So there's different things that you can do to support our world and still drink. I can recommend a couple of natural wines. So some of the bigger brands that you might be able to get your hands on easier would be Donkey and Goat. They're great. Tracy Brandt, she's the winemaker. She's really wonderful. They ship anywhere as well. J, the letter J, and then Brix, Brix. They're also amazing, and they'll ship to you anywhere you are as well. So those are some California winemakers. Also Martha Stumen, Martha, and then Stoumen. Her wines are lovely. One of my favorites. Really, really, really beautiful. And then outside of California, you have Ariana Okipinti. She's kind of a cult classic, cult queen in the wine industry, along with Elisabetta Foradori. Those are two Italian winemakers that make really beautiful natural wine. We make natural wine, Vinivore wines. Let me think of some other kind of bigger brands that would be easier to get your hands on. Gaspard is a French wine that's really, really budget friendly. They're all kind of under $20. Gaspard. From the Tank is a boxed wine that's natural. That's a lot of bang for your buck, and it's really, really good. So it's actually 4 bottles in this box, and you can keep it in your fridge for a couple of months. It stays good. Let me see. I got some cases behind me here. Love You Bunches. That's Stolpman Vineyards. So Stolpman. And they have a So Fresh line that's really, really good. They'll ship to you anywhere. I highly recommend those. They have a lot of really great chillable reds. What makes a red wine chillable and not chillable is the tannins. So you want lower tannins, so not that big, heavy drying sensation. So you want a lighter bodied wine, like a Beaujolais classically. And that'll allow for a little chill on it. It tastes really like juicy and fresh and yummy. So all of their wines are really, really great. Any other questions, you guys? Can you please? Yeah, okay. All right. Well, this has been a great half hour. Thank you for tuning in to Girls Night online. I was really excited to be a part of this. And sorry, I'm in my inventory room in my shop. Not the greatest background, but you know, due to COVID these days, you know, it's our shop is become less adorable and more of a warehouse inventory situation. So sorry for the background, but I hope you enjoyed yourself, and thank you so much.